Good evening and welcome to the big story on NDTV Profit. I'm Nupur Talwar Suri. Now, global tech giant Meta has said that it will appeal against the Competition Commission of India's ruling that has imposed a hefty fine of 213 crore rupees over its 2021 privacy policy update. Now, this policy update that came when the world was grappling with the COVID pandemic required users to consent to sharing of their data with other Meta-owned apps like Facebook and Instagram. Users did not get the option of opting out, raising concerns about potential anti-competitive practices and data privacy violations. Now, this forced the CCI in India to take up the case suo motu. In fact, watchdogs in other European countries were also forced to act. Just earlier this week, the European Union fined Meta a whopping $841 million for abusive practices. The charge against Meta is that it favored Facebook Marketplace by tying it in with its social media platform, Facebook, thus committing a breach of the EU's antitrust rules. Meanwhile, the top court in Germany ruled against Meta over the 2021 data leak tied to the exposure of personal details from 533 million Facebook users. So in a sense, Meta seems to be surrounded by mounting problems. Let's begin with Rishabh, who's been covering this story for us. Hi, Rishabh. Thank you for joining in. Now, Rishabh, to begin with, explain to us why the CCI found that Meta, and by extension, of course, WhatsApp, guilty, and it laid that fine against it. And what has Meta's reaction been?
Right, Nupur, the bone of contention here all trails back to 2021. This is when WhatsApp implemented a privacy policy. And what really has irked CCI, or the Competition Commission of India here, is the take it or leave it attitude. And that a lot of big tech companies across the globe have been known to associate with nowadays. So CCI has taken a strong step. The entire bone of contention is the take it or leave it attitude in the way in which the 2021 policy was put upon users. It basically, CCI in its order has also said that it compelled all users to accept these expanded data collection terms, and it did not give users the consent to actually opt out of it. And users were actually scared at one point in time of losing access to WhatsApp. And you and I know how important WhatsApp is today, given the strong network effect, right? You and I can't shift to another messaging platform today purely because even though there are free alternatives available, we can't shift because all of our contacts are on WhatsApp. And so there's this network effect that WhatsApp has taken over. And that is what has been abused, which is what the CCI has found here. Apart from, so this is the major bone of contention. And now with respect to this, two more sections of the Competition Act have been breached by Meta through WhatsApp here. And those two are basically abusing this dominant position to gain significant dominance in two other markets. So one of them being, of course, the messaging market in India, the OTT app market. WhatsApp is the clear leader there. Even players like Facebook Messenger, Telegram, Snapchat all fall back way behind WhatsApp's monthly active users. So that's one market that WhatsApp abused. And the other one is the online advertising display market, which again is commanded by WhatsApp. And that's where the Meta group and WhatsApp makes most of its money from, which is advertising. So these were the two additional markets that CCI found WhatsApp and Meta to be in violation of. And so this 213 crore fine came as a combination of the contraventions of these three sections of the Competition Act of 2002.
All right. Rishabh, do stay with us. That also brings up the three questions that we are asking on the show this evening. Number one, is WhatsApp leaking your personal data? Number two, did the lack of an opt-out policy force users into sharing data? So in a sense, did Meta abuse its monopolist position? And number three, can governments across the world force Meta to comply? And joining me on the big story this evening is Saksham Malik. He's a senior program manager at The Dialogue. Virag Gupta, he's a cyber law expert and Supreme Court lawyer. And Kanish Kaur, founder of the India Future Foundation. Good evening, gentlemen. Mr. Gupta, good to see you again on the show. To you first. Now, under the Competition Act of 2002, the regulator essentially has called the platform's updated privacy policy exclusionary as well as exploitative. Now, what do you make of the CCI's ruling, particularly since WhatsApp actually updated its privacy policy in 2021? It was a time then everybody was dealing with the COVID pandemic, and it was a time when users were using WhatsApp for a large part of their communications when they were, sort of cloistered in their homes.
Nupur, there are very disturbing findings in this detailed order. And initially, when the CCI started suo motu proceedings, so WhatsApp went in a challenge that order in High Court, Division Bench, and then Supreme Court also. And finally, after 3 years, we got this order. And let me tell you 5 disturbing things in which government should take the counter proceedings, and so that they may not go in appeal against this order. The first thing is, in European Union case, they have imposed the penalty on the global turnover, wherein in this case they have imposed the penalty on the Indian turnover, and that data is not in the public domain, so they have kept it confidential. And for that purpose, they have brought a new regulation and act in 2023 and 2024. That is the first thing. Now, secondly, finding is there that WhatsApp and this Meta company is operating as a group company, and they are sharing the data internally with all 3 platforms of WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook without the knowledge of these users. So, on this whole, I was calculating, Facebook is around 58 crore, WhatsApp 50 crores, and Instagram 39 crores. So total 147 crores, which is more than the population of India. Now this whole data is being shared. So government should now, after this finding of CCI, government should impose GST on this whole transaction, because even if it does not come within the domain of the CCI, but government should recover the taxes, because that data was finally used by the Meta company, and they are not maintaining separate accounts of the WhatsApp. It is clear from the CCI order. Now the third important point is that why this whatsoever their defense is there before the CCI, that defense was in the 2016 privacy policy, and in 2021 policy was compulsive. So let us understand that how it will impact the other tech giants, because CCI order will be applicable only against the Meta. So to make this order applicable against all other tech giants, government should come clearly with the rules, or Supreme Court, only Supreme Court judgment or the law passed by the Parliament will apply to all the tech players. So we need to take action against all tech players as per this judgment, and the quantum of the penalty and the fine has to be increased as per the global turnover.
All right, Mr. Gupta, do stay with us. Let me bring in Kanish Kaur into this now. Kanish, earlier when you and I were talking, you seemed to suggest that Meta in fact has some discriminatory policies, which it uses against India, despite the fact that India is one of the largest markets for them. What are the reasons for that? And do you still, go with that you think the policies towards India are discriminatory?
Absolutely. The policies of Meta towards India are discriminatory. We have seen Meta through WhatsApp has abused its dominant position in the market by bringing in a policy where it says take it or leave it. The privacy policy update in 2021 were a clear example where they wanted to eliminate their competitors and create monopoly in the market, use autonomy by mandating data sharing with Meta companies, contravening to the principles of fair practice. Now, this is something which is completely unacceptable in the world's largest democracy. Second, the anti-competitive data sharing agenda, which Meta has been running between sharing user data across Meta companies, creates a barrier to entry for some of its competitors. This is unfair practice, which Meta bolsters in the online advertising market space and leverages for its domination within the messaging to consolidate its advertising business. Now, this is something which leads to unfair practices within the country. So, what CCC, the Competition Commission of India, has done is absolutely right. Now, what this will ensure is that WhatsApp will not share this data with other meta companies for advertising purpose for at least 5 years. We would also get more transparency regarding data sharing on how WhatsApp is sharing data with some of its companies, right? And users will have the ability to opt out, particularly from any kind of prominent in-app notifications, and reinforce their user choices. Hence, it's important that consumer data sovereignty is enforced within the market, and you have fair market practices which come out clearly. The importance of giving user control over their data is important because we are talking about bringing in a data protection law in the country. We want to have informed consent and clearly call out opt-out mechanisms. So far, that hasn't happened with Meta and WhatsApp. Preventing monopolistic behavior and ensuring that dominant players do not stifle competition is something which is needed in the market for a country like India, which is one of the largest markets for Meta and some of the other social media intermediary platforms. Hence, this directive will create significant operational challenges for Meta, but they need to rethink on how they want to lead this market if they want to continue working in India. Mind you, they also threatened to move out of the country when they were asked to comply to the significant social media intermediary guidelines, and they have challenged that ruling in the court. So what we see from Meta is non-compliance, non-adherence to Indian IT laws, and to other set of guidelines which they have been told to follow multiple times. So as a country, I think we need to send a strong message not only to Meta and WhatsApp, but other significant social media intermediary platforms that they need to comply to the local laws of this country if they want to continue operations in India.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And let's bring Saksham in to this. Now, Saksham, of course, Meta has responded saying that they will appeal against it, which is their right. They can go to a court of law to appeal against what the CCI is said. But do you think big tech really needs to wake up and smell the coffee now and start complying with local regulations, as we just had Kanishk also talk about? They want to do business in India. They've got to follow our rules.
Thank you, Nupur, for having me on board. That's a tricky question to ask, and the short answer is, of course, yes, but the long answer is much more complicated, right? I mean, to think that big tech companies or large tech companies or any tech company for that matter does not have a host of laws already to comply with would not be correct. For a company like Meta, even from a technology law or technology policy angle, there's a host of laws they already have to comply with, right? Now, when it comes to issues of competition and antitrust and digital competition, right? Smelling the coffee essentially means that, of course, they have to comply with the law. Now, there are multiple laws that these companies already have to comply with from the point of view of data and competition. Now, the Data Protection Act that we've been talking about, we're still awaiting the rules to be enforced. So as and when they come on board, of course, they'll have an impact on how data is shared and not shared. There's also a digital competition bill that we have been discussing that the government is planning to come out with sometime soon. Essentially, the provisions of the digital competition bill also are very similar to what the CCI is trying to do through these enforcement orders. So we have one against Meta right now. We saw a host of orders against Google in the past, in this year itself. Now, I honestly believe that there are a host of laws already in place and in the pipeline also, which are going to have an impact on how large tech companies or tech companies at large are going to have, will be able to operate in India. However, I also believe that whenever we're trying to make a law or a policy, or whenever we're looking at enforcement action, the perspective of an enforcer and the perspective of of the government, for that matter, has to be much broader. Now, in this entire ecosystem of social media and advertising and instant messaging, what we tend to sometimes forget that it's not just the tech platform existing in a silo, right? We have the users who use these tech platforms. We have consumers like you and me who are on Facebook and WhatsApp, right? We have the advertisers who also rely on these platforms for certain value add for their consumers, right? Now, to give you a very small example in terms of how this needs to be looked at, right? Now, on one hand, we of course have certain restrictions that are going to be imposed on WhatsApp and Meta in how they can or cannot share information with other Facebook subsidiary companies, right? Now, there may or may not be certain benefits for the point of view of transparency and privacy, right? There may be certain benefits that may come out for other advertising platforms which might want to compete with Facebook, right? However, at the same time, you also have to understand that the advertisers who do, use these platforms for their, day-to-day operations. And mind you, these are not always big companies who are advertising on marketplace. You will even see smaller influencers and smaller, let's say, entrepreneurs and startups using meta platforms for their services. They do tend to rely on the ability of these platforms to actually be able to target the right content to the right people at the right time. And these abilities that platforms generate do come to a certain extent from their ability to cross-use data from different platforms, right? So the ability of data to use WhatsApp data, of course, within the domain of the law, does add to the ability of it to offer certain services to advertisers that, okay, you know what, we'll help you reach the right people at the right location at the right time. So my point being here that, yes, of course, there is no doubt that, every company, including larger companies, need to, operate within the confines of the law. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that there are a lot of proposed and existing laws in the country which are trying to do this at the same time. And the perspective that we see going forward has to go beyond a tunnel vision of that, hey, do we want to go after big tech or not? We have to look after a bigger stakeholder universe.
So now, Saksham, just a follow-up question. As part of the penalty, of course, WhatsApp has been ordered not to share user data with other Meta companies for advertising purposes. This is for a period of about 5 years. Now, how do you think that's going to impact them?
Interesting question, Nupur. To be honest, I mean, they've been ordered not to cross-use data, right? On another level, as I was talking about the TCB, if and when the law comes into position, it coincidentally has a very similar provision, right? And there's very little doubt that a company as big as Meta will always be covered under the law, of course. And this prohibition, when the law comes into being, let's say next year or whenever, would have come anyway. Now, what this does, until or unless there's a Supreme Court stay order or any order which, let's say, puts a hold on the CCI order, what this essentially means that that WhatsApp cannot really cross-use data between different platforms for, let's say, advertising purposes, right? For non-advertising purposes, there are certain exceptions which the press release mentions. I think the final order also came out in the afternoon today, if I'm not wrong. But the press release also mentioned that there are certain restrictions on how you can do about it. One very important point that we have to keep in mind here, Nupur, is that initially when the 2021 policy came, right? So the situation is also not as straightforward as it might be made out to be sometimes. In 2021, when the privacy policy was first announced, it looked like a very take it or leave it option. And then, of course, the CCI started investigation. It eventually also went to Delhi High Court on jurisdiction issues. The Supreme Court got involved in 2022. I think MeitY was involved to a certain extent. Now, what happened over the time that WhatsApp essentially did not, like, the premise was that, hey, if you do not accept these privacy policies, we're going to kick you off WhatsApp or you can't use WhatsApp. That actually did not happen. Even the users who did not opt in to the privacy policies were not kicked out of WhatsApp at last, right? And I think, if I haven't read the CCI order, but I think the CCI has also taken a view of that, of the conduct that WhatsApp has showed in the past 2 years and taken a lenient view of it, I think. So that would be better when we read the order. But the idea being that, I mean, how this will impact is that, of course, there will be major restrictions on cross usage of data. The ability of Facebook, for that matter, or WhatsApp to cross use data to provide more personalized advertisements to consumers, right, based on data tracking and based on data sharing, will of course be impacted. They'll have to comply, of course.
All right, I think Rishabh wants to jump in and has a question. Yes, Rishabh, please go ahead.
Right. What I want to understand, Mr. Malik and Mr. Gupta, from both of you is, and Mr. Gaur, if you want to jump in as well. Mr. Malik, you mentioned a couple of very important legislations coming through in the next year or so in terms of the Digital Competition Bill, as well as the DPDP rules that will now be notified. I want to understand, is the set of rules that the government is working on, what do you rate them in terms of adequacy, in terms of governing big tech in India? Are we at all ready? Because what happens with technology in general is that the government is always catching up with the speed and in terms of governing it. What do you see in terms of adequacy going ahead?
Thanks, Rishabh. I think that's a very important question. I feel that adequacy, before we talk about adequacy, I think we need to talk about how much do we need to regulate big tech and these practices, right? So consider it from a more holistic point of view. You have the CCI's enforcement power, right, where they're coming out with these orders, the one we saw today. Then they have merger review powers, where before, of course, before any merger above a certain threshold goes through, it has to be approved by the CCI. Then we have a Competition Amendment Act, which I think one of the panelists was talking about earlier, right, which has again provided increased powers to the CCI to be able to, let's say, curtail some of this conduct. Then you have the DPDP rules. Then you have the DCB, which wants to do something. We had similar discussions, I think, a few months ago about the Digital India Act, right? Now, I think the question is not whether it's adequate. I feel the CCI's enforcement history by and itself is more than enough to make large tech companies comply, right? That's my personal opinion. These laws may, let's say, there's a risk that on one hand, it may add and let's say further strengthen the ability of the CCI to provide, to let's say curtail certain conduct in market. At the same time, it could go either way. It would also lead to a bit of overburdening. It could lead to a little bit of, let's say, overlap of legislations and overlap of objectives.
Right.
So that remains to be seen as and when they come through. But by and large, I feel that the CCI's enforcement power, especially when it's been strengthened with the Competition Amendment Act, and we've been hearing about a new unit that has come up, I think, in the CCI called the Digital Markets and Data Unit. I think the CCI has all the firepower to tackle whatever issues are there in technology markets.
All right, Mr. Gupta, would you like to comment on that? Specifically, of the laws that are now going to be in place, as Rishabh mentioned, there are a host of them. Do you think that they are going to be able to give an overarching sort of legislation for the kind of big tech, violations that we have seen?
Earlier you were asking about the advocacy, and second aspect is the laws which are to be taken place so that we have a digital ecosystem. Now I will combine both the aspect and summarize my understanding of this order on 5 points. The first is, this is fundamentally on the competition aspect. So for competition purposes, I was reading this judgment, and in this judgment, group companies and the individual companies, this concept. So when the Meta is operating through three companies, so we have to consider Meta as a main company, and from that perspective we have to see that how it is impacting the competition, business competition in India, and how they are the big dominating force. Because if we consider only the WhatsApp or the Facebook or Instagram, then we are not going to understand the implications of the whole group company. That is the first understanding. Now the second is users' privacy. For that purpose, there has to be express consent, that yes, I am giving my express consent for sharing of the data. Tactful or the compulsive consent should not be considered, because unless there is express consent, there is no question of getting out. So that is the second aspect. Now the third aspect is business growth. Now if we are allowing Meta-like companies and their disclosures are not there, their dominant, their role is not there, so it is impacting Indian startup and other Indian companies. That is the third understanding. Now the fourth is the legal compliances. So legal compliances, foreign these tech giants have to do, whether many laws are there already there and many laws are to take place. So legal compliances is key to the constitution basic structure, that is equality. And the fifth and last is that this whole order is based on the targeted advertising, and the order is passed for the 5 years, and though that portion of order will apply immediately from the receipt of the order, and the rest portion of the order, that is the deposit of the fine. For that purpose, they have given the 60 days time. Now regarding this for other purposes, data sharing done by these companies, that is not allowed and that cannot be allowed. And even if it is allowed, so government should be richer by that data sharing, and that disclosure should be there by such organized data sharing, and government should recover taxes from these companies for such data sharing for the commercial purposes, whether that is used for the targeted advertising or not. And on each such transaction, GST must be imposed, because those comes within the purview of the GST. So existing laws are to be enforced, and new laws and integrated laws which make overall internet service providers, these mobile companies and telecom service providers, all can be covered within the comprehensive. Like we have brought the criminal laws, we have to bring the digital laws which may cover the comprehensive all aspects with one regulator and one authority.
All right. Final question to you, Mr. Gore. What is the larger message that's coming in for big tech? We have been seeing these antitrust rulings that have come against big tech in not just India, but also in other countries. So what do you think of as the larger message here?
I think the larger message for the big tech is you can have the largest market share, you can be dominant, but what about accountability? Uh, Methods like mandatory data sharing leave users into coercion, right? It's a dangerous precedent to set up and it needs to be addressed. The second is the key debate on privacy versus profit. In case of getting more profit, you are violating user privacy, which leads to non-compliance, and it's not on the principles on which a country like India operates. So this ruling highlights a larger global debate. Should user data become the currency for digital platforms like WhatsApp or Meta? The CCI decision reinforces that data privacy cannot be sacrificed or altered for making profit by the big tech. Hence, sharing WhatsApp user data with Meta companies goes beyond the app's core purpose, right? It blurs into the ethical lines of dangerously using data and leading to manipulation. The third key element is the market competition. By leveraging its domination, Meta has created entry barriers for startups operating within India, right? It does not promote a startup culture. Hence, it stifles competition and basically becomes a barrier for innovation and growth within the country. Hence, the decision needs created so that smaller players could also get equitable amount of opportunity and is not dependent on Meta as a platform if they want to, become a competitive player in this space. Since it's a larger message for the big tech that if you're building out practices, you also need to have accountability. You need to respect the local laws of India, and it puts out a global stance that India will take a proactive stance, which will require these companies, even if they are global companies, to comply to local jurisdictions, right? Hence, it's important that users must be put first, and it should not be profit and dominance. The decision is to give power back to Indian users, and that's what this ruling has brought out clearly, that India continues to allow these digital platforms to operate, but not at the element of compromising their privacy or allowing these platforms to become autonomous. The law of the land must be considered first.
Right.
Hence, users should be informed about these changes and encouraged to exercise their rights, such as opting out from unnecessary data sharing. Hence, it's basically a call to action for policymakers that this ruling would allow more laws to be created. When we are looking at data protection bill to come out in India, we must enforce strong principles so that these companies comply to these laws and do not take the law again, these laws again to the court, which unnecessarily leads to a policy paralysis. And we've seen that Meta do that multiple times. We saw that in case of the earlier significant guidelines, social media.
Right.
Yeah. And I think civil society also continues to play a very, very important role. So when you bring out such laws, you need to have a larger consultation to take it into account. And it must be balanced.
Absolutely. So essentially the word that's coming out of the big story is that the power to decide must lie with the users, and also that big tech needs to be more accountable, and perhaps the CCI ruling will nudge them towards being more accountable. All three of you gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the big story this evening. Well, with that, it is a wrap on the big story, but news and updates continue on NDTV Profit, so do stay with us.